Hello, bonjour, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started in a few minutes or moments as we're waiting for the audience to join the webinar. Greetings and welcome everyone to this webinar. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Bienvenue à ce webinaire. My name is Fichtele. I'm Program Management Officer, Human Settlements here at the UN Habitat Canada office. It's a pleasure to be with you today and facilitate the second edition of our Urban North webinar series. In our first webinar, we discussed climate-ready, people-first housing solutions and welcomed speakers from the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, the Société d'Habitation du Québec, the World Bank, and the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance. Today's webinar focuses on adequate and resilient housing for Northern and Arctic climates. Before diving further into the topic, I would like to acknowledge that our office is located in Montreal on the unceded traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, also known as Mohawk. Montreal, Tiohtià:ke, has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations. We would like to acknowledge all Indigenous peoples and nations that regarded and regard these lands as a place of belonging. When we talk about the human rights of Indigenous peoples, it's important to place this discussion within the broader international legal framework of international and regional human rights instruments, particularly the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. UNDRIP Article 21 provides Indigenous peoples the right without discrimination to the improvement of their economic and social conditions, including, amongst others, in the area of housing. I would also like to welcome our francophone audience. J'aimerais aussi souhaiter la bienvenue à nos participants francophones. N'hésitez pas à vous exprimer et à poser vos questions en français. Nous offrirons un outil de traduction simultanée pour celles et ceux qui aimeraient avoir accès en français au contenu discuté. Pour accéder au logiciel d'interprétation, veuillez cliquer sur l'icône globe intitulée Interprétation dans vos commandes Zoom, située dans la barre inférieure, et sélectionnez la langue que vous souhaitez écouter. Cela permettra de basculer l'audio vers la langue interprétée. L'audio original restera légèrement audible en arrière-plan. We will start with a welcome and opening message from Omar Siddique, head of the UN Habitat Canada office. Following that, we will listen to the presentations of our panelists. We will then continue with a Q&A session and a closing statement from the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation to highlight key points of this webinar. We encourage all viewers to submit questions in the Q&A chat. My colleagues will be monitoring the chat and gather questions for the speakers. A link to the PowerPoint deck will be shared for those who may want to save a copy. I now have the pleasure to give the floor to Omar Siddique for the opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, moderator, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to colleagues, and importantly, all friends. A warm welcome from myself and the entire UN Habitat Canada team to our second Urban North webinar series on adequate and resilient housing for Northern and Arctic climates. We have received over 145 registered participants for today's meeting, which I think is really a testament to the interest in this topic. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that much of today's discussion concerns lands stewarded by Indigenous peoples for generations. Their knowledge, governance systems, and lived experience are indispensable to designing housing that is technically sound, culturally appropriate, and community-led. In Canada's north, but also across circumpolar regions, housing is not simply shelter. It is health, it is energy security, it is climate adaptation, it is dignity. Technically, we face converging pressures. Thawing permafrost and shifting freeze due to climate change, where thaw cycles are undermining foundations, extremely high construction and maintenance costs driven by remoteness, heavy heating demand and dependence on imported fuels, overcrowding and aging housing stock with direct impacts on health and well-being. Colleagues, due to the climate crisis, the Arctic is warming, some say more than twice the global average. Historical design assumptions are therefore no longer sufficient. Building envelopes, foundations, and infrastructure standards but also must continue to evolve. But incremental adjustments will not be enough. Under the new urban agenda and SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities, of which UN Habitat is the global custodian, adequate housing goes beyond durability. It includes affordability, accessibility, cultural adequacy, habitability, and location. And in Northern context, resilience must cut across all of these dimensions. That means we need climate responsive design adapted to dynamic ground conditions, energy efficient and low carbon systems suited to extreme cold, modular and locally adaptable construction methods, stronger local technical and institutional capacity for long-term maintenance and delivery. But let's not forget amongst these technical matters that resilience is also social. Housing solutions must advance Indigenous self-determination, reflect cultural, spatial needs, and strengthen community governance. Technical excellence and trust go hand in hand. UN Habitat Canada is working closely with the Government of Canada and its partners to bring forward relevant international experiences that can better support Indigenous-led housing supply models. We are not importing solutions here, colleagues, but facilitating exchange, adaptation, co-development, ensuring that global lessons reinforce local leadership. Strategically, at UN Habitat, we see some key priorities emerging. I'll give you three. First, innovation in housing designs and standards. We need to align business codes, building codes, materials research, and climate risk data to Arctic realities. Second, blended housing finance and partnership models, bringing together federal, territorial, and Indigenous governments, development institutions, and private actors to close persistent, affordable, and infrastructure gaps. And third, knowledge exchange across circumpolar regions, connecting experiences with lessons from our northern context globally so that we can accelerate learning rather than reinvent solutions in isolation. So you see, colleagues, this webinar is part of that effort. And perhaps most importantly, in the Arctic, when we talk about security, it's not only about geopolitics or patrol routes. For us at UN Habitat, real security begins with a safe, a warm, and a resilient home. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to a rich but also practical discussion. Thank you. Over to you, moderator.
Thanks, Umar, for your opening remarks. I will now briefly introduce the Urban North webinar series and today's webinar topic. The Urban North webinar series is organized by the UN Habitat Canada office with the goal of advancing global knowledge creation and exchange related to housing and sustainable urban development. Despite differences, countries in the global north face similar realities, challenges, and opportunities in housing and sustainable urban development. it is essential to recognize that any comparison between territories must appreciate that northern regions are not a single homogeneous entity, but rather a mosaic of territories, including indigenous lands, each with distinct historical, economic, social, and cultural specificities. This initiative also acknowledges that boundaries are not rigid. Discussions can both benefit from and contribute to the perspectives of actors in the Global South. The space is intended to be open and inclusive, welcoming perspectives and learnings from around the world. Today's webinar will feed directly into UN Habitat Canada's knowledge generation on international best practices in housing supply policies and strategies, with a particular focus on adequacy, resilience, and climate responsiveness. During today's webinar, we will discuss housing initiatives in Northern and Arctic communities, focusing on innovations and challenges around climate responsive and culturally adequate housing solutions. Jointly, we will explore the central question: which international best practices in Arctic and Northern housing delivery, prioritizing Indigenous-led approaches, offer relevant lessons for strengthening inclusive and sustainable housing strategies. We're very pleased to welcome senior experts from Canada, Alaska, and Greenland to speak on this topic with us today, sharing their insights about Arctic and Northern housing innovations, best practices, as well as new and persisting challenges. I now have the pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Chris Kolaruk, Director of Public Policy at Cook Inlet Housing Authority in Anchorage, Alaska, in the United States of America. Chris serves on the boards of the Alaska Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, as co-chair of the Legislative Committee of the National American Indian Housing Council, and as chair of the Legislative Committee of the Association of Alaska Housing Authorities. He's Chupik, German, and Irish, and his grandparents are from Mekoryuk on Nunavut Island, Alaska. Chris is enrolled as a member of the native village of Mekoryuk and a shareholder in his regional and village corporations. Chris, thank you for joining us today. I now turn it to you.
Thank you, Fee. Krisawa. Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. A bit about Cook Inlet Housing Authority. We are a tribal organization located in Anchorage. We were established by our tribe, and our primary purpose was to turn federal grant dollars into homes that Native people who earn a low income could afford. Next slide. I often start with a picture of who we serve as a reminder that quite a bit of our work, though it is frustrating and difficult, is about making people's lives better. Next slide. I often have to include a breakdown of income for public presentation, because there is a perception that when people are occupying assisted housing, affordable housing, that they are all on welfare, or that they are all drains on the public pension system. The reality is that the majority of the income, the majority of the dollars earned by our residents are either wages by 44%, or Social Security, which is the United States Elders Social Safety Net. Other non-wage, usually that's a child sending remittances to their parents. Pensions, and there is some welfare, some social payments. But largely our residents fall into two categories. They're elders who are on a fixed income from retirement, or there are people who work hard and just cannot afford the market rate of housing. These are people who work at our grocery stores, who clean our buildings, who care for our children. Next slide. In where we live, I am lucky, though I am Chukdun, I'm Chukpik, I work and live on the land of the Dena'ina people. I am lucky to live here. I hunt, I fish, I live in a beautiful place, and I find my life's work and meaning on their homelands, and I'm very grateful for them for that. Next slide. Uh, where we live and the economic center of Alaska is Anchorage. As you can see, it's a decently sized city. There's only about 300,000 people here, but because of the commerce center of Alaska, because of how we serve as the hub, we are actually much more cosmopolitan than just our size would suggest. I often say that Anchorage is 45 minutes from Alaska. Next slide. Next slide. So I show this because the Mercator projection of that many people have grown up with is very distortionist and quite honestly imperialist and racist. It makes Europe and the east coast of North America appear much bigger than it actually is. And so we don't realize how big the rest of the world is and how small sort of the global west and global north is. If you can imagine Alaska as a place where between New York and Florida, but without roads and without railways to efficiently and cost effectively transport material across vast distances, you start getting a feel for why things are the way they are. Next slide. Because of that logistics and because of the sizes of places, we operate on a hub and spoke system. If you imagine a bicycle wheel, there's a center point, probably the largest village in the area, where governance, where commerce, logistics, healthcare are centered, and they serve outlying villages, usually by airplane. Next slide. This is one of those villages. It's a village called Savunga that I had the pleasure of traveling to quite often when I used to live in the northwest of Alaska. You notice there is no dock here. And the largest building in this village is in the upper right. That is the school. The average age is below 18. So we know that housing need will grow. And in Savunga, unlike the rest of the state of Alaska, so Savunga's population has doubled in the last 50 years, like the rest of the state of Alaska. Unlike the rest of the state, the economy hasn't boomed with oil jobs, where in Anchorage, people who service the oil industry, the economy has expanded to accommodate that. In Savunga, the GDP per capita is $14,000. In Anchorage, it is $40,000. Next slide. This is literally a picture when I authorized the construction of a new home in Savunga. This is a loader driving into the Bering Sea to unload a landing craft so that we can build a home. Next slide. The logistics and the distance that I brought up earlier conspire to create pricing that is outrageous. A sheet of plywood costs $140 here, whereas this same sheet is $12 in Anchorage. A single plank of wood, a 2x4, being $12 versus $3 here. In places that the majority of people earn a low income because the majority of their economic activity is hunting and fishing, DIY is not possible. Next slide. I bring up this map as further illustration of the geography. St. Lawrence Island, that village I showed you, the island upon which Savunga is located, it is 150 miles southwest of Nome. Gamble, another village on that island, is 40 miles from Russia. If you remember, maybe 15, 20 years ago, a famous Saturday Night Live sketch where someone uttered, "I can see Russia from my house." I've literally stood in Gamble and seen Russia from the backyard of a home in Gamble. This economic isolation, this geographic isolation also conspires with the weather. This is a village, this is a island 100 miles south of the Arctic Circle in the middle of a cold, cold sea. Next slide. That creates climates where extreme temperatures occur, such as 40 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, or hurricane force winds that would evacuate Florida. So that our residents who earn a low income can afford the homes we build, we have to build homes that are very energy efficient. So the walls are extremely thick, meaning they're very heavy, meaning they're very expensive to move that very great distance. Next slide. Climate change is also another factor. We have to engineer our homes to accommodate climate change. There is a person in that picture standing under the home next to the pilings. When that home was built, there was 1 foot of space between the floor, between the ground and that home. Now there's a 6-foot tall man there. Next slide. And we're in places where people still get 50% of their calories from the sea. Next slide, next slide. I'm going to skip the discussion of homelessness largely, except for to remind people that at least in Alaska, the majority of people who experience homelessness are not the chronic homeless people that many people want to complain about. In the next slide, you can see that about half of them are Alaska Native people, which is unfortunate. But the real sad story, the next slide, is that 20% of people who experience entered homelessness before they were 18 years old. And that's largely many times due to their parents experiencing intimate partner violence. Next slide. Oftentimes, because of the homelessness crisis, we get questions like, can't we send them all back to their villages? And the answer is no. I'm going to skip quite a bit of this because I think much of what can be discussed can be brought up later. But at the end, I want to discuss some very important issues. If we go to the second to the last slide, all of these things, the geography, the climate, the low income nature of our people mean that we just cannot afford to build homes that are purely innovative. If someone is recommending or asks for innovative solutions to housing, you need to stop listening to them right away because it means they are not actually a housing practitioner with experience, and it means they are not actually interested in listening to housing. What we know works in housing are old solutions, tried and true methods that anyone during a hurricane can fix. I'm talking about maybe things like structurally insulated panels that need our help to build at scale to drive down the price, or procurement of things that are old technologies, but old enough that anyone in a village is able to remember how to fix during the middle of a blizzard where no parts can come in or out of a village. The real housing, the real innovation is not in new things or new ways of doing things, but in reliable ways of doing things where people already are educated about their use. Stop sending new untested technologies to places that cannot fix them in the middle of a blizzard. And hopefully we start really investing in our people. That's all I can cover today.
Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing these valuable insights from Alaska. I invite our second speaker, Julia Christensen, to switch on her camera. Hi, Julia. Hello. Julia Christensen is an associate professor in the Department of Geography and Planning at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, in Canada. Born and raised in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, Denende, on Chief Dry Geese Territory, her work lies at the intersection between social, cultural, and health geographies. with a specialization in critical research with Northern and Indigenous communities, in particular geographies of home, homelessness and health, housing, and Northern urbanization. Julia Christensen currently leads At Home in the North, a SSHRC research partnership that creates, shares, and mobilizes knowledge on homelessness and housing insecurity across the Canadian North. Julia, thanks for joining us. I now turn it to you.
Thank you, Faye. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to spend time with you today, and thank you so much to UN Habitat Canada for including me. Thank you to Chris for those words that were just offered. I found myself nodding emphatically throughout that presentation and can't wait to connect about it later. As Faye said, my name is Julia Christensen. I'm an associate professor in geography and planning at Queen's University here on the beautiful homelands of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee nations. These nations are also signatories of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, and I'm grateful always to be able to learn from all of the teachings that this covenant provides and work to fulfill the obligations that it sets out for me as a settler, a teacher, a scholar, community member, and parent. Next slide, please. To begin my reflections today, I wanted to provide you with a bit of a grounding in terms of who I am and how I come to my work on home sovereignties in the North. I was born and raised in Yellowknife on Chief Dragi's territory, and for the past 15 years, I've pursued an academic career dedicated to the North through a focus on supporting the well-being and sustainability of Northern peoples and communities through partnership-based work on Northern housing and home. Next slide, please. There are a range of topics and themes that I've explored in examining dimensions of Northern housing and home, including the dynamics of home and homelessness amongst Northern Indigenous peoples, the roles of Northern housing and social policy in the urban North, and Indigenous self-determination of housing. I want to emphasize, however, that the knowledge that I hold, any knowledge that I have, is inextricably grounded in the experience and perspective of the many Northern and Indigenous experts who have mentored me over the years. Next slide, please. For the past 6 years, I've been very privileged to lead a major Northern housing research partnership at Home in the North. This federally funded partnership comprises over 40 Indigenous and public governmental organizations and agencies, as well as NGOs from across the territorial and provincial Norths. We recently launched a report titled A Home for All Northerners Towards a Northern Housing Ecosystem, which will form the conceptual foundation for my comments today. Next slide, please. The history of housing policy and programs in Northern Canada is a relatively recent one, though it's critical that we recognize that Indigenous peoples across these lands since time immemorial provided shelter for their community members in ways that met their needs and that reflected the place that shelter holds in a broader constellation of relations with land and with one another. The kind of housing we're discussing today was largely introduced in the North in the mid-20th century and was part and parcel of federal efforts to administer health and social welfare programming, including education, to Northern peoples. It was also part of an effort to centralize Indigenous peoples into permanent communities in order to facilitate their participation in the wage economy, resource development, and in some cases to demonstrate Canadian sovereignty in the North. From the beginning, Northern housing was characterized by inappropriate designs from the South, as well as policy that shifted from the provision of housing for Northern residents to own outright to rental schemes that have changed shape over subsequent decades. The sustainable provision of Northern housing has also been marred by consistently inadequate funding. Next slide, please. Northern housing policy, design, construction, repair, and retrofitting continues to rely heavily on labor, materials, and expertise from outside the North, a housing system that is increasingly vulnerable to the diverse effects of climate change. Yet skills, capacity, and innovation in Northern communities is abundant and already existing. Indigenous and community-led housing initiatives responsive to the cultural and contextual needs of Northern communities are expanding in exciting ways. Over the past decade, we've seen growing mobilization on the part of Northern and Indigenous communities to take back decision-making control over housing design, construction, repair, and administration. We've also seen an increase in federal promotion of Northern and Indigenous-led solutions to the housing crisis. There's a growing recognition that home is sovereignty and that sustainable Northern futures depend on significant investment in a Northern housing economy. Next slide, please. Yet Northern home sovereignty is not just about housing. As we've explored in the At Home in the North partnership, the housing continuum model that underpins much of Canadian housing policy and programming does not reflect the realities of Northern communities. The continuum's end goal of private home ownership is rarely representative of the housing options, needs, and values in Northern Canada. The universalizing tendencies of the continuum flatten the unique place-based geographies of home and housing provision in the North, while its isolated presentation of housing options ignores the wider system that enables the delivery of and access to Northern housing. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. In May 2024, At Home in the North members, including Indigenous housing providers and advocates, Northern policymakers, service providers, architects, scholars, gathered in Yellowknife on Chief Dragi's territory to workshop an alternative framework to the housing continuum. Emerging from this knowledge gathering was a template for a Northern housing ecosystem that captures Northern specific options and end goals for housing, as well as the relationships that shape home and the network that is integral to the sustainable delivery of housing in the North. At the center of the ecosystem is home as a site for peace, safety, stability, well-being, and family, alongside self-determination, autonomy, and independence, all articulated as the end goals for Northern housing. Surrounding this core is the constellation of community relationships that shape homemaking and well-being in the North. These relations locate housing and home within a web of community well-being connected to education, culture, economy, health, children and families, land, and governance. There are a growing number of examples of the Northern housing ecosystem in action. The Kashogatane Housing Society's integrated housing development and skills training in order to develop a Northern housing labor force. Keepers of the Circles, Indigenous women-led modular housing construction center in Northern Ontario. Saku Innovative Building Solutions, modular housing factory plans in Arviat Nunavut, and myriad Indigenous self-governments working with Indigenous-owned Inspector in a Box to promote local housing inspection and repair capacity in the North. Next slide, please. In closing, I want to highlight 4 key points from my comments here today. The National Housing Strategy Act recognizes housing as a human right. Indeed, we can push this further to identify home as a human right, understanding that home underpins the health, well-being, sustainability, and autonomy of all Northerners and at all scales. There's significant discussion today around the need for greater investment in Northern infrastructure. Here, we need to recognize housing as a critical component of collective infrastructure. Sustainability across the Northern housing ecosystem is investment in Northern people's communities and resilience. A market-oriented housing continuum does not fit the unique landscape of Northern housing. We need to invest in culturally and contextually appropriate alternatives to a market-based approach that don't reserve a sense of autonomy and independence for only those who can access market home ownership. North to North knowledge exchange and home solidarity building is absolutely critical. Innovation, capacity, creativity, and leadership are in abundance across the North. Turning to the existing expertise and experience in Northern housing and home across Alaska, Northern Canada, Greenland, and beyond, and sharing knowledge and resources is needed to promote sustainable Northern housing futures. Next slide, please. Thank you very much.
Julia, thank you so much for these great takeaways on Northern housing. Before I introduce our third and final speaker, I just wanted to shout out to our audience. Please submit any questions that you may have as you're listening to our presenters in the Q&A chat that you can find at the bottom of your Zoom window. And now I'm pleased to introduce Stephen Arnfjord, who's professor at the University of Greenland and director of its Center for Arctic Welfare. Stephen's research focuses on Greenland's welfare society and analyzes social policy, housing, and homelessness with the aim to provide data for evidence-based social policy. He has published extensively on Greenland's welfare system, social work, poverty, and social policy under Arctic conditions. Stephen has a keen interest in policy-relevant and applied research that is grounded in community-based work to tackle homelessness and increase inclusion. He's passionate about combating inequality and promoting the social capacity of Arctic and Nordic societies. Stephen, thank you for joining us today, and over to you.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you for having. Thank you for inviting me. It's such a great honor and super hard to follow the experts, Chris and Julia, after this, but I'll do my best. Hello, good. Stephen Mia Takapunga. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen. Before I start, I gotta stipulate that I don't speak on behalf of an indigenous culture. So even though I'm married to an Inuk and both of our children speak Kalaallisut and we speak it at home, I am, as you see, very white. So please keep that in mind while I do the presentation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about housing in Kalaallit Nunaat, which is the Kalaallit word for Greenland, which we don't like a lot anymore. So there are good and bad things about housing in Greenland. It more or less took off after the Second World War, and what you're seeing here in the main pictures are an aerial photo of what we call do-it-yourself housing. Next slide, please. These are types of houses that we find all over the country, up and down the coast, on the west, east, north, and south. They are build-it-yourself homes. They are wonderful, colorful. The problem with them is that they were designed by the colonial power, by Danish builders and architects, and shipped, as you would see from Chris's wonderful pictures, via ship to the nearest harbor or coast, and then brought into land and built there, either by the homeowner themselves or with assists from a local carpenter. The issue with these houses are they are small and accommodate an understanding of a sort of like a nuclear family and not like a multi-generational family that you would see, and that would be required by a lot of people. They don't have a lot of space for preparing the hunt or preparing the skin after the seal hunt or anything like that. So they are nice and colorful, but a problem, and that problem sort of continued in the, well, it's not funny, but it's quite a fun. Continued when sort of the hefty centralization and urbanization in Greenland really took form. Next slide, please. So the classic block to show people is from Nuuk, where I am right now, but this is the similar one in Maniitsoq, just a city just 8 hours by boat from where I am right now. This is the colonial administration's understanding of how to sort of centralize people in our coastal towns, and the whole idea was that you would go away from the independent smaller houses that you can actually see one in the picture, and create both a term of urbanization and centralization, together with a labor force or a workforce, if I can put on my Marxist hat, a working class, and the point was that they were to live cheap, so you can pay them a lower rent and then increase the price you would get for the fish. But it's the same sort of issue that it's not a local culturally sufficient way or sustainable way of living in the Arctic in a block like this, and all of these blocks are slowly coming down and being renewed and remodeled. This is a housing block designed in Frederiksberg, a suburb to Copenhagen, by Danish architects. So the times have definitely changed, and that's a good thing. So next slide, please. This is a view from my window. This is downtown Nuuk. So what you're seeing here, the red buildings are modern student dorms being built. So now these are designed by Galasliit architects, designing a modernized way of living for students, and also the building in the back, the blue and the green ones in the back, are designed here in Galasliit Nunaat. But it's still so. I often introduce this area of class and culture while talking about housing and housing issues, because it's still sort of like the middle classes designing for everybody else, the other classes around them in a lot of ways. They're also designing the welfare system, the judicial system, the educational system and stuff, and not really learning how to communicate in a participatory way. And this goes beyond these are Galasliit talking to other Galasliit, and this goes beyond race and culture in my mind. So we still don't really have what some of the things that we long for, a participatory approach to housing development and housing stock. I gotta say a little bit about the context. Any land in Galasliit Nunaat is public land. You can't own an area of land. You rent it from the government, and the majority of our housing stock is public housing. That's remnants from the colonial past, but we don't feel a need to change it, because we really think that it's a public duty to build for the people. The issue with that is that which people, and how do we ask them, and how do we city plan and prioritize when looking 10, 20 years into the future. And there's a stern tendency to focus on open water cities and looking away from the smaller settlements up and down the coast, where you really don't see a lot of housing development. Next slide, please. So one of the issues is that old housing is being torn down. That's both a climate thing and a developmental thing about rethinking new ways to live. This is the first housing block ever built in Greenland. It's from the 1950s. Next slide, please. So one of the things is that even though we adapt to this way of living, a renewal is very, very important. Maintaining the housing stock, making it a good and friendly place to stay. Sorry, this is a little dramatic picture, but I have a tendency to that. Another thing that I'm really keen to talk about is obviously the level of homelessness. Next slide, please. So we have a 1% homelessness nationwide. One of the reasons why it's so high is that we also count hidden homelessness, and we are pretty effective at that. When we build or when we renew housing in Galasliit Nunaat, it's a public matter. It's not an independent housing organization. It usually happens at a municipal level and at a national level when that takes place. We do have private entrepreneurs, but they don't build housing without a public approval of the house. There's a public hearing allocated to that. but what we would like, and what a lot of people are talking about, is that we really like to see a more participatory way of discussing how do we want to live in the future. How is the Galaslied family changing? What sort of new requirements are we looking at? We do not have a lot of youth housing to address that issue, and that's something that we really need in the future. Next slide, please. And this is just a mapping of Greenland, the last homeless count that we did, with the majority of people being in Sermersooq municipal, where I am right now, and then scattered up and down the coast and a little bit to the east. And next slide, please. So sorry for rambling a little bit. That was more or less what my 2 cents, or what I had to present at this part. And I welcome any questions, and I'll try my best to answer them if I can't. Thank you for your time, Rihanna.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Wonderful. For sharing these insights on Greenland's housing system. Listening to our presentations today, we can see that across the 3 countries, housing systems face common difficulties, including overcrowding, deterioration of existing buildings, exacerbated by climate change, and then high costs of renovation, construction, and infrastructure. We've heard speakers stress the need and share powerful best practices around simple solutions that enable self-determination and affordability, and also on human first and northern-led housing systems that are culturally appropriate. North-to-north knowledge exchange has emerged from the presentations as a potential key lever for scaling some of these innovations. I'll now ask all of our speakers to kindly open their cameras for the Q&A session, and I have the pleasure to invite our Head of Office, Omar Siddiq, to facilitate the interactive segment of this webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the rich presentations, and I enjoyed so much, of course, the content, but also the visuals that all of you had, because it was like we, got like we were there in these areas, and I found that very illustrative as well. We received quite a few questions in advance of this webinar, colleagues, when people were registering, but I see also the Q&A box is also quite hot. But let me start first with, we'll go back to the first speaker, to Alaska, to Chris. So we have a question, and let me give you 2 questions that are somewhat together. First one, Chris, from Matthew Bergen, who is an engineer at the Maniluk Association, which is a nonprofit corporation that provides health, tribal, and social services to residents and represents 12 federally recognized tribes in Northwest Alaska. Matthew's question to you is denser townhome style housing feasible and acceptable in rural Alaska? And Art Nash, Chris, is also asking, in the chat, have the Cold Climate Housing Research Center and Chananuk Wind Group Innovations been part of what you mentioned as ignoramus buildings, as they've come up with high-tech workable innovations for the tribal residents and villages? Let me hand it over now to Chris, and then I'm going to come back for some specific questions to Stephen and Julia. Over.
Yeah, I appreciate that first question about denser housing. So there's a big piece of development finance here that is at issue. The cost of a place often, the cost of a home often is in the specialists. It is in the infrastructure. It is in the skilled trades. Low population places, very remote places don't have journeyman plumbers, electricians, and other necessary skills. So the huge costs in constructing homes is in the logistics, which is oftentimes in Alaska the same price as the material cost itself, plus the skilled labor. And so building density or townhome style or apartments saves some money, but not as much as you might expect in what we call the lower 48 or the lower 48 states. There is some savings, but it is not sort of the big economies of scale difference that you would expect in a higher population area. Also, the funding model is an issue because of ongoing maintenance, where the population of people who earn a low income are paying less than the cost of actually maintaining the home. It's actually a deterrent to building homes that are not single family homes that can be conveyed to a homeowner and sort of exited off the books of the housing authority, the housing entity that must provide them. That's an issue of program design and adequate funding. If we were fully funded to where we could serve everyone and we did not have those constraints, actually, yes, that would be quite a big change. In terms of cold climate housing research and other issues, there has been an evolution in sort of this, what Julia and Stephen mentioned. I'm going to say this, being half white, just understand I'm sensitive to this, but sort of the white savior mentality of people from the big city coming through and telling us how to solve our problems. There has been an evolution from that to actually coming to our villages and seeing how we live and incorporating that. And there are advances. I think maybe in the beginning, 20, 30, 40 years ago, that the answer to that question would have been a little different.
Thank you so much, Chris. So now I have a question I want to ask Stephen first from CMHC, but because it relates to learning between Canada and Greenland, I also want Julia's take on this. Okay, so this is from Anna Karibsin from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Anna is asking, over the last weeks, we've heard from Canadian Inuit that they would like the Canadian government to follow Greenland's model for infrastructure and housing. Could the panelists speak to what Canada could learn from Greenland's current approach and what they have learned from past efforts? Stephen, you have the floor.
Thank you for that question. When it comes to local decision making, there might be something to learn. And when it comes to decentralizing decisions about housing is really, really important in this area. All centralized understanding of this is probably going to fail if it's not done correctly. What we still need to see back home is that even though it's indigenous led and it's been indigenous led for 30, 40 years, there's still a level of being more participatory in your approach, ask more and be more flexible in how you design housing for the future. That's the thing about housing in the Arctic. It is housing anywhere, right? It's a very, very permanent solution. So are there any ways to be more flexible as family patterns change in the future? We are seeing a more older population in the years to come, for instance. They have different needs than the current one has.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Julia, over to you. Reactions to that? Agree, disagree, compliment?
Sure. I mean, just for full disclosure, Stephen and I have been long research collaborators and have actually done work together in Greenland, which has given me, so much opportunity to kind of make some of these comparisons or reflections, in my own time. And certainly, I know that the news items that Anna is referencing. I think just kind of going back to Chris's comment earlier about, decisions being made by people that, haven't actually been to northern communities, haven't seen the way that people live. I'll say that, for some time there has been a kind of knowledge and technical exchange between, administrators, developers, planners from Northern Canada and Greenland around questions, relating to infrastructure and building in northern climates. But those conversations have not been Inuit-led historically. We're at an opportunity now where we really need to learn directly from Inuit on, what the side that we call Canada now and the side that is referred to as Greenland. Really following Inuit perspectives in terms of what it is that they want to be able to learn from one another. I would say that on the Greenlandic side, what I have seen in my time in Greenland is really, an investment in infrastructure in a holistic or comprehensive sense. So housing is part of a greater, constellation of infrastructural development, whether it's roadways, public transportation, accessibility. Those are things that, I think we have a lot to learn from in Northern Canada. I also think with respect to what Stephen's saying about participation, democratic housing governance, these are other areas where there's a lot for us to learn in Northern Canada, especially around the governance of social housing. Social housing, public housing forms the greatest part of the housing spectrum in Nunavut, for example, and yet people who live in social housing cite time and again the sense that they don't feel that they have autonomy, they don't feel that they have a say over decisions that are made that affect their lives, their everyday lives. And I think building that autonomy is what, with At Home in the North, we're talking about when we say we need to cultivate a sense of ownership for all Northerners, regardless of the kind of housing that they live in. And so there's a lot for us to learn from the ways in which social housing is managed in the Greenlandic context, because people who live in housing have democratic rights that are built into the ways in which housing associations are established and function. So that's an area where I would love to see some more collaboration and learning.
Thank you, Julia. That's very clear. Both of you started also speaking about participatory processes and having those be more intentional with Inuit communities. This relates to a question that we've now received from Becca Denley. Maybe Stephen, you could go first, and then Julia, and then I'm going to come back to Chris because you brought up financing, Chris. It's piqued a lot of interest, so there's some more follow-up questions on this topic for you. Stephen, Becca is asking, I'm curious what kind of participatory processes are proving the most helpful when discovering the needs of diverse communities? Are there any known resources to assist organizations that are interested in better communication / community engagement activities?
No. That's the short answer. But I mean, we do have public hearings when new apartment buildings are being built, new schools are being built. There's a public hearing ahead of that. But when I talk to architects about the real participatory aspects of architecture or ways of living, there's a huge process that goes before actually designing housing, having a community-led forums where people can offer opinions and have ideas about how they live. I've yet to see that come into practice. I see it in small places here and there. We have a new community house over in Dasilag in the east that was semi-participatory in its design, but I would like to see it in permanent housing structure. There's a lot of calls for that sort of thing.
Julia, would you like to complement that?
Yeah, I'll add that that in terms of, the cultivating participatory processes, that the opportunity to gather housing providers, northern-based innovators, and again, taking note of Chris's comments on innovation. This is, something, again, that I'm struck time and again by the fact that innovation exists in community already, and yet the tendency is to really focus on, silver bullet solutions that are coming from outside the North. What we need is to support Northern capacity and Northern skills that exist in abundance. And so with, the opportunity to have this partnership at home in the North, it's actually been, the partnership itself has enabled a level of participatory process that wasn't possible before, because you have people that are wearing multiple hats in community, overburdened with the amount of work and responsibility that they feel in providing housing to community members, who through opportunities to be able to kind of look outside the community at what's happening elsewhere, not just across Northern Canada, but Alaska, Greenland, learning about strategies, tools, resources that are existing elsewhere. I think really continuing to recognize the importance of community building across the North between Northern communities is where we really can begin to foster greater participation. And I'd say that, within our network, we have people like Dr. Sheila McCartney at Toronto Metropolitan University, who's a real expert in participatory design. We have people like, Stan Knight, who's on our executive committee, who owns the Inspector in a Box program, where he's going into communities and engaging with community members about the specific needs and visions that they have for local labor training. There's lots of these really fruitful examples that only get shared because of community opportunities for coming together and community building. So even a webinar is a great participatory tool, I think.
Thank you. I think so too, Julia. Now I'll go to Chris. But actually, this is a question for all the panelists if you want to address it, because the person is Alexander Korevu-Bork, asking about supply chains, cost, and dependence on Southern materials. It's a recurring theme across all three presentations. And a question related to this is, what solutions are emerging for sourcing materials raw and transformed locally to build, upgrade, and maintain housing? Giving the increasing attention by the Canadian government to secure the Arctic, are there ways to leverage military supply chains to reduce the cost of delivering materials that can only be acquired in the South to Northern communities? And this also relates to an advanced question we received from Michael Brossard from Concordia University's Next Generation Cities Institute about what financial instruments, tools would be more appropriate for Arctic Northern housing. Chris, a very simple question, right? So just over to you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The number one or number two cost in all of housing construction in northern climates is logistics. So there are three things that I think are quite helpful here. Local material in some places is absolutely is great. The ability to source lumber and grade it locally for local construction is great for places that have trees. Unfortunately, for many of the places that touch the water where Stephen and Julia and I work, there are no trees. It's actually called tundra. So that is not helpful there. But where there are forests, that is one option. In terms of logistics and the military cooperation, we know that the United States military has a significant interest in the North, and there's actually a program called Innovative Readiness Training. And what it basically does is it utilizes military logistics to assist in either transportation or readiness in housing construction. And our military likes these because they are real live situations that can help with deployment. So when we say we need to move a pallet of 6 homes to a northern climate, it really does replicate a potential theater of action. So the military is actually a good partner in expanding that possibility. But I think the most common possibility here is actually in the ability to study with some academic rigor the idea of shared procurement and the ability to make sure that there are incentives for commercial, governmental, and private uses, all sharing a logistical mode. We have had a situation where there are parochial silos between actors. And because of timelines, we go out to bid and then we put our stuff on the barge whenever we can. Where if we could have, and I've tried to get the US government, and my friend Griffin with the Association of Alaska Housing Authorities has tried to get the US government to invest some time and energy into studying how we can align all of our procurement together so that one barge can carry the government, the nonprofits, and any potential private material on one place. It requires sort of getting out of our own heads, and it requires a little bit of risk on the part of people who are already living on the edge, which is why we need some of the academic rigor behind it.
Thanks so much, Chris. That's really a very clear presentation. I want to go to Stephen now, in case he'd like to add anything on this. And in particular, linked to financing, there was another question in the chat from Pau Torres to you, Stephen. And Pau was saying, I was in Nuuk recently and saw several buildings into construction, but how is it being financed? And is it enough to tackle the housing crisis?
The last one's easy. No. So the first one, it's a mix we are seeing but it's only a few towns in Galashiq Nunaat where we have private investments in the housing market and the housing stock. So it's mainly public housing when we're talking about that, and public housing is fine in a green landing. So that's the public investing in the local community, in the municipalities and countrywide. So when they are building student dorms, for instance, that's the government building those. When they're building housing, that's the local municipality building those. So a mixture, but mainly public funded.
Julia?
Yeah, I mean, the supply chain question is a very interesting one, and obviously one where there's been significant attention to this in Canada through, things like the Northern Housing Supply Challenge that recognize supply chain issues as being a huge contributor to the sort of persistent chronic northern housing need. Like Chris was saying, a huge portion of what we consider northern Canada is tundra. So logistics becomes like the kind of central query with respect to the supply chain. There are, Fort Good Hope, the Kashogatne Housing Society did a sawmill pilot. But if we were to go back and look at, all of the applications, for example, to the Northern Housing Supply Challenge, we would see an abundance of innovative community-led projects with ideas like, storage facilities to be able to, when you're transporting modular housing components, to be able to actually store them in the north, to limit that kind of having to plan around the very short transportation season of summer, which, as we're seeing with climate change, is, there's no guarantees that there will be enough water in the Mackenzie River to bring things up on the barge, or there are no guarantees that ships will be able to travel, across along the coast, reliably from summer to summer. So finding ways of being able to keep materials, whether they're for new housing construction or housing repair, in the north, so that the transportation distances are far fewer, I think is one of the kind of critical areas. when it comes to the emphasis on military infrastructure, today, this is where we get back to this question that, that we've been faced with for decades now, where decisions are made in such a reactive fashion in short-term decisions. Let's invest a whole bunch of money into military infrastructure now without taking the time to really think thoughtfully as to how military infrastructure could support housing infrastructure and other needed infrastructure sustainably for northern communities. So I'd love to see, I think we have a tendency to kind of, once we're done with one program or project, to move on to the next one. This is an opportunity again to go back to those ideas with the Northern Housing Supply Challenge and think about, are there ideas here that we could build on that could help, pursue our objectives with respect to military infrastructure while also, responding to these supply chain issues. And that requires communication. It requires investing in relationship building. We're seeing many ways that Indigenous leaders are trying to really creatively approach the military infrastructure discourse by asserting their own needs and visions and priorities. But that communication needs to be facilitated from both sides.
Thank you, Julia. And we have time for one more question, but I wanted to prompt you as well, all three speakers. After this question, I wanted to come back and ask you for your kind of final key message that you would like to leave the audience, maybe 1 minute after they disconnect from the Zoom, go back to their desk, go back to their home, what you would like to leave them with in terms of a key message. But before that, the question that I have, it's unpacking a little bit the intersections of different identities within communities. And it's from Neil Belanger, who is the CEO of Indigenous Disability Canada, the British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, or BICANS. Neil is asking, disability in Indigenous communities is often under-prioritized. How do you ensure it is on the leadership agenda ongoing, particularly in these areas of housing, for example? Who would like to take that one on? Stephen.
What a wonderful question, and something that we really should address way, way more. So we are very fortunate that we have a spokesperson for people with disabilities in Greenland, and has a strong focus on building. What's it called? There's a word for it. Is it called dynamic designs? So there is a lot of focus on that, but we are seeing issues with that. If people need more assisted living, there is a tendency for more centralized services around the bigger towns. So unfortunately, some people will have to leave the places where they grew up and spend most of their time if they're immobile for some reasons, or require more advanced services. That's housing that's typically located in some of our bigger towns. So that's part of the challenge.
Thank you, Stephen. Julia, Chris, would you like to come in on that question? Accessible ready housing for people with disabilities. Julia?
Yeah, I think it is such an important question, and it really gets at the heart of the challenges with, the sort of typical one-size-fits-all approach to housing that has really characterized Northern housing policy, and especially kind of going back to the hub and spokes model that Chris presented earlier, this acceptance, that for someone, for example, who has accessibility support requirements, living in a small community, that it is a perfectly normal expectation that they should leave their home community to go to a regional center to be able to access those supports. It's the same assumption that we give to elders growing older in their communities. And when they have particular health support needs, it's, we're not batting an eye at the idea that they're actually going to be leaving their home community. All of the support that they have there, the country food, all of these things that are so important to health and well-being, to go to hospital or long-term care in another community. And this is why, we come back to one of the sort of foundational challenges around not just northern housing, but housing in general. And that's that housing is siloed from all of the other elements that are integral to home. It's the way we govern housing is separate from health. It's separate from social welfare. It's separate from education, employment. And I think this is where Indigenous-led, Indigenous self-determined solutions to housing are critical, and funding them in a way that allows for communities to not just, because right now the funding is channeled towards specific needs that are defined from the outside. We need youth housing, we need elders housing, we need family housing. When the capacity to make decisions around housing needs and design and planning exists within community, you can start to creatively look at housing that can move with people across the lifespan, that can be accessible for people in community with accessibility requirements, while also being a place where people with young children, or people that are getting older can live. We have to move away from a model where we silo, see housing as simply the built environment, four walls and a roof, so that we can integrate, all of the needs that exist within communities so people can stay at home.
Wow, thank you so much, Julia. Chris, if you'd like to respond to this point from Neil, and also maybe perhaps give us your concluding key message.
Yeah, I think this message will dovetail quite nicely with that. So our people show up in statistics of homelessness in bigger cities, particularly Canada, Alaska, at much higher rates partially because of the conditions of home. People often mistake cultural preference of overcrowdedness. I actually had a conversation with someone representing a worldwide organization of Jewish synagogues. And I asked him about his grandparents' experience coming to the United States and New York in overcrowded conditions, and whether or not after a few generations of economic stability and growth for their family, if they continued to live in the conditions that their grandparents did. He said, no. So in the same way, our conditions of multi-generational housing sometimes are driven by preference, but not all the time. Sometimes it's purely because there's not enough homes. Our people are most successful living where they want to be. Induced migration because of housing condition or economic disparity is a big factor in sort of the difficulties facing our people in larger cities. And because that is a distributed cost, it's hard for politicians to understand it's much cheaper on the entire federal balance sheet to support people where they want to live so that they can practice their practices and be with their people, which is a natural prevention for substance, for mental health issues. And that is something that takes a very long time to hammer into the minds of politicians.
Thank you, Chris. Stephen, may I ask your concluding message, your key takeaway that you'd like to leave to the audience?
I think I mean, we could basically end with hammering stuff into the minds of politicians. I like that a lot. But if it sifts down to a public opinion and a public matter as well, so keep focusing on the rights-based approach to housing and eventually to homemaking is very, very important. And it's I mean, when you're born, you don't decide where you're born and what settlement, or you're up and down the coast or in the north or inland or at the coast or anywhere else. So you should have access to those rights. I know it's very, very complicated logistically and politically in a lot of ways, but maintaining the right to have your own house, your own home, and settle where you want to live and create a life of your own and for the community around you is so important. And that's that. I know it sounds very basic but it's very advanced to see out in practice. So that's the simple but complex answer to that one.
Thank you, Steve. Very fundamental. Julia, over to you for your key message.
Yeah, I would just say that innovation exists already in the North and that we need to invest in supporting a sustainable Northern housing ecosystem, and that the greatest demonstration of care and ultimately sovereignty is through investment in the people and communities in the North, and showing that their well-being, their aspirations, their self-determination is paramount, and providing the infrastructure that facilitates that and that gives the strongest possible foundation for Northerners, and in particular for our children and youth. That's how we demonstrate sovereignty in the Arctic.
Well, thank you to all of our expert speakers for being so knowledgeable, open, and honest with us, I think, number one, and also to our audience for all of the lively questions and comments. We didn't get to all of them, but we will make sure that we respond to all of them after the webinar with the support of our experts. And now I'll just hand it over to my colleague, Faye, who will introduce the closing segment. Faye, over to you.
Thanks, Omar. Yeah, I have the pleasure to hand over to Marcel Vautour. He's the Director of Indigenous and Northern Housing Policy at CMHC, and he will provide us with the closing remarks today. Over to you, Marcel.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'll try to keep it brief, but I wanted to first acknowledge the richness of all the dialogue with the respective panelists today, the great insights, and I want to thank UN Habitat Canada as well for inviting and bringing us all together today. We saw today across 3 distinct jurisdictions that we really share one common reality, and that's that Northern and Arctic housing is essential infrastructure for vibrant communities, economic development, self-determination, security, and others. I wanted to kind of just go back on a few of the key themes that have emerged. I was listening carefully and trying to kind of capture some of the discussions and the questions. So the first is that Indigenous and community-led solutions should be the standard and not the exception. The expertise shared today from Alaska, Greenland, and across Northern Canada reinforces that the most resilient housing approaches are those that are designed by and with the communities that live in them. Lots of discussions around participatory decision making to help incentivize a sense of ownership amongst Northerners and the local people living on the land. I also picked up on housing specific role in the North. So the importance of recognizing that a home is a critical part of the safety and well-being in the North and is part of a collective community-based infrastructure. We also heard that the Southern or market-based approach to housing with private home ownership as kind of the end-all goal often doesn't work in the North. That there's a lot of public-owned housing and lands across northern jurisdictions, and that's a value and something that we need to kind of harness. We also talked about the importance of culturally appropriate, locally designed homes, that there is no one size fits all. For example, with the Alaska example, we saw that housing solutions need to be simple, they need to be based on historical, local knowledge, and we should really lean on that and be careful when incentivizing kind of innovation that becomes overly complicated or that we don't have the means to kind of to fix or keep going. Thirdly, I did pick up on housing as infrastructure for climate resilience. Of course, in the Arctic, climate and housing are inseparable. There's a lot of climate change impacts, whether linked to the permafrost degradation, more storms, erosion of the coastlines, aging infrastructure, and those need to be taken into account as we're looking more broadly. So climate resiliency has to be embedded in the design, and of course based on local knowledge and proven systems there. This requires kind of a horizontal integration across housing and infrastructure, energy and climate, and a vertical alignment amongst the different partners and orders of governments as well. Fourthly, I think I would say we talked about kind of the high cost of housing, finance challenges, and potential solutions around that. We discussed, the chronic underinvestments in the north and the very high cost to build in the north and to repair and to keep the housing stocks as well. We also panelists discussed logistical and supply chain issues, challenges to getting building materials to the north, opportunities sometimes to look at other innovative ways of housing, whether it's through modular or other things, but also ensuring that these are indigenous led and leverage local labor and resources when they're available as well. Just to connect to our mandate at the Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation briefly before concluding, I will say that at CMHC, we remain a key partner in the broader northern ecosystems in Canada, mainly on the financing side of things. Our federally funded programs and investments are kind of more directly aimed at housing finance within Canada, including in the north. And we also have a strong history and expertise in providing sound data and research and innovation with respect to building and housing in the north, and really working with Inuit and northern communities to realize their own housing priorities. We will continue to support northern housing solutions and contribute to the broader objectives of the government of Canada. And just to conclude a little bit and a bit of a call to action, I will say as Canada's turning its attention to the Arctic for the vast opportunities in terms of defense, sovereignty, critical infrastructure, natural resources, etc., and in recognizing that it's a key part of the government's nation building and major projects agenda, I think we can all learn from some of the best practices that were discussed today from other northern jurisdictions, such as embracing Indigenous-led governance models and decision making, including in larger development projects, incentivizing local training and labor opportunities, ensuring climate resiliency and adaptations, promoting dual use infrastructure. We talked about defense spending, other types of spending, and to provide lasting legacies for people that are living in the land, right? If we are building these broad projects for different objectives, why not have enough, have permanent housing or staff housing that gets converted into local housing? And obviously ensuring economic reconciliation where Inuit and Northerners get to benefit from projects within their own lands. So while Alaska, Greenland, and Canada's North all have unique contexts, we saw today that we have a lot of commonalities and we can learn a lot from each other. As a key takeaway, a bit of call to action, I would encourage all of us assembled here today across our different roles as researchers, practitioners, and policymakers to keep this conversation going and to look to pursue some north-to-north cross-collaboration across our respective jurisdictions. We are, after all united as Northerners or wanting to improve conditions and housing outcomes for Northerners, inhabitants of this great Arctic and Northern land. So I will leave it at that, and thank you all.
Thank you so much, Marcel, for these thoughtful remarks. I would like to express a sincere thank you to all of our speakers and to the audience for sharing your knowledge and for being so engaged today. We would appreciate if you could fill out the post-webinar survey that will pop up as you leave the meeting. This will help us improve the format going forward. Un grand merci à tous nos conférenciers et conférencières. Nous vous sommes profondément reconnaissants du temps que vous avez consacré à vos présentations aujourd'hui. Merci également au public pour votre attention et vos questions. Nous vous serions reconnaissants de bien vouloir compléter le questionnaire qui s'affichera lorsque vous quitterez le webinaire. Cela nous aidera à en améliorer le format. Before we close today's session, please mark your calendar for our third Urban North webinar that will take place later in spring this year. This upcoming session will focus on demographic shifts, population aging, and what these trends mean for ensuring access to adequate, climate-resilient, and affordable housing. I would also like to highlight that the World Urban Forum 13 will take place this year in Baku, Azerbaijan, from 17 to 22nd of May. We're pleased that there will be a dedicated pavilion for Canadian events. WUF 13 will feature a focused roundtable on Indigenous housing, providing an important platform for dialogue, partnership building, and advancing solutions grounded in rights, resilience, and community leadership. If you're planning to be in Baku this May and would like to learn more and participate in UN Habitat Canada's programming at the pavilion or overall at the forum, please contact us at unhabitatcanada@un.org. Please also follow our social media to stay updated. Further details and the confirmed date will be announced shortly. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.